Do liberals value facts and science more than conservatives? If yes, why? I would not frame the issue in terms of whether US liberals value facts and science more or less than conservatives. Instead, I would look into a. Their relationship with science and expertise and the history of conservative distrust of science as an institution, and b. how partisans differ not only ideologically but also psychologically. Political orientation and lack of rapport with science. In the United States, there is a long history of anti-intellectualism, generalized negative attitudes toward intellectuals and experts, not to be confused with healthy skepticism, and of fraught relationships between laypeople and experts. See for illustration historian Richard Hofstadter's influential book on the topic published in 1963. Whereas Hofstadter attributed anti-intellectualism mainly to populism, there is widespread contemporary agreement that, although not exclusive to conservatives, liberals can also dislike and distrust experts. It is more common within this population. Mata, 2018. In the words of political scientist Eric Merkley, anti-intellectualism often goes along with conservative ideology, religious fundamentalism and populism. Conservatives and fundamentalists may feel threatened by the implications of scientific research on issues such as climate change and evolution, while populists may see experts as a class of elites seeking power over ordinary citizens. Anti-intellectualism is fueled by these factors, but it cannot simply be reduced to any one of them. There is currently an ongoing political campaign to undermine and discredit mainstream knowledge-producing institutions which began decades ago. As historian of science Naomi Oreskes, co-author of Merchants of Doubt, and her co-author Charlie Tyson explain in their essay on the narrative of liberal bias, historical evidence shows that the trope of the embattled conservative professor has been part of an organized right-wing effort, beginning in the middle of the 20th century, to discredit mainstream knowledge-producing institutions, chief among them the press and universities, by contending that such institutions are not neutral but instead guilty of a liberal bias. Our present discourse about the politics of universities has never broken out of this frame of reference. In fact, according to historian David Greenberg, the idea of liberal bias can be traced to the civil rights era. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, white Southerners grew resentful toward national journalists who covered the movement, whom they saw as advocating desegregation. Losing the battle for public opinion, Southern spokesmen such as Alabama Governor George Wallace adopted a populistic idiom, promoting the notion that an elite, left-leaning Northeastern media were distorting the news to fit their politics, an idea that soon, under President Nixon, became conservative dogma. And to quote Republican political strategist Stuart Stevens, next, somehow, the party of idealistic Teddy Roosevelt, pragmatic Bob Dole and heroic John McCain became anti-intellectual, by which I mean, almost reflexively opposed to knowledge and expertise. We began to distrust the experts and put faith in, well, quackery. The Republican Party has gone from admiring William F. Buckley Jr., an Ivy League intellectual, to viewing higher education as a left-wing conspiracy to indoctrinate the young. In retribution, we started defunding education. Never mind that Republican leaders are among the most highly educated on the planet, it's just that they now feel compelled to embrace ignorance as a cost of doing business. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, as an example, denounces coastal elites while holding degrees from Princeton University and Harvard Law School and having served as a Supreme Court clerk. On denialism, anti-intellectualism, and the politicization of science. Before continuing, I want to stress the difference between holding negative attitudes toward science as an idea or ideal and being distrustful of mainstream scientific consensus or conventional scientific experts. Generally speaking, science denialism is more subtle and insidious than outright rejection of the idea of science. Also see The Art of Bullshit. For illustration, common techniques of science denial, e.g., to dismiss the scientific consensus on climate change and to discourage acting upon it, include accusations of conspiracy among scientists, appeals to false authorities, giving more weight to fringe scholars, cherry-picking studies, demanding unrealistic standards before acting on the science, and so forth. Often, conservative people at odds with the science have nonetheless points of reference who ostensibly have done their own scientific research or are scientifically literate, and who hold a similar status as the experts or intellectuals. That said, there are studies which found that conservatives are more skeptical about the evidentiary value of science, Tullett et al., 2016, and less receptive to scientific recommendations, Blank and Shaw, 2015. I also want to address claims that anti-intellectualism on the right has been spurred by the politicization of science. These claims are ahistorical and disconnected from the reality in which science is produced. Science has always been political. It was political when Galileo was punished for supporting heliocentrism a little over 4 centuries ago, and it was still political when, in more recent history, scientific giants developed race science and pursued eugenics and governments embraced both racialism and eugenics. In the words of Adam Rutherford, 2022, the author of multiple books on the genetic history of humanity and the darker sides of his field, all science is political. This is a statement that causes vexation among some who confuse the ideals of science with its reality. We aim for an objective description of the world and try to minimize the grubby, political, personal, and psychological biases that hinder our view of reality. But in all science, and especially the scientific study of humans, we inherit knowledge infected by the contingencies and political obsessions of our scientific forebears, whether we own it, deny it, or acknowledge it. I conclude this part with an excerpt of a blog on the topic of the politicization of science written by Mark Hufnagel, known for developing the concept of denialism with his brother Chris Hufnagel. The fact is, science is inextricably linked to politics, always has been, always will be. If only because science is a human endeavor and we are political creatures, science is political. If only because we recognize science is an effective tool for answering questions, including political questions, science is political. If only because the modern model of scientific exploration and discovery is paid for in large part by government, science is political. If only because science drives the health care that keeps us alive, the loudest debate raging today in the halls of power, science is political. And if only because science has provided answers about our bodies, our planet, and our universe that people don't want to hear, science is political. The psychology of liberals and conservatives. Besides well-documented differences along partisan lines, between Democrats and liberals on the one hand and Republicans and conservatives on the other, with respect to attitudes toward science, scientific experts, and their role in society, there is also a large amount of evidence showing that partisanship can affect both cognition and perceptions, Van Bavel and Pereira, 2018, and that, even though both groups have biases, there are asymmetries between liberals and conservatives, Barron and Jost, 2019. For example, according to Garrett and Stroud, 2014. More importantly, from a deliberative perspective, no group prefers disproportionately pro-attitudinal sources to more balanced alternatives. If citizens had only partisan stories from which to choose, the results here suggest that people would gravitate toward like-minded and avoid counter-attitudinal stories. The results also suggest, however, that if stories containing both pro- and counter-attitudinal stories were available, they also would be selected. Consider, Republicans will actively avoid stories with a clear Democratic slant. Democrats will prefer stories that offer a more diverse perspective to those with a Republican bias, but both groups will prefer an alternative which they consider to be more balanced to a one-sided source biased in favor of the opposing party. And according to van der Linden et al.'s 2020 study on the perception of fake news, one factor that is intriguing about the current research is that, although the issue of fake news in general clearly cuts across the political spectrum, the fake news effect appears more pronounced among conservative audiences. In fact, although the bias itself occurs on both sides, we find evidence of an ideological asymmetry, such that more conservatives, 75%, think CNN is fake news than liberals think Fox News, 59%, is fake news, Z equals 2.03, P equals 0.04. Of course, although the two outlets are not equivocal, they are both rated by independent sources as politically biased with mixed accuracy, Media Bias/Fact Check, 2019. These findings coincide with prior research which shows that liberal Democrats are more likely than conservative Republicans to indicate that neither outlet is particularly credible, Stroud and Lee, 2013. In addition, we find that liberals seem to associate the term fake news more with politics, and Trump in particular, whereas conservatives overwhelmingly use the term to discredit the mainstream media, 71% versus 5%, Z equals 9.42, P less than 0.01, possibly following elite cues from the president and the Republican Party. These findings are in line with other recent research on fake news, Pennycook and Rand, 2019, and opinions polls which find that conservatives, 45%, are substantially more likely than liberals, 17%, to state that the mainstream media is regularly reporting fake news, Monmouth University, 2018. And according to van der Linden et al.'s 2021 study on conspiratorial thinking, which is relevant for science denialism, In the meantime, our findings, which are clearly focused on the context of American politics, provide strong support for the notion that conspiratorial ideation and the related phenomenon of science denial are forms of motivated reasoning that resonate more with politically conservative than liberal or progressive audiences. See also Diegues, Wagner-Egger, and Govrit, 2015, Fessler, Pizayer, and Holbrook, 2017, Jolly et al., 2018, Kraft et al., 2014, Lewandowski, Oberauer et al., 2013, Miller et al., 2015, Mooney, 2012. Conspiracy theories, like many other types of rumors, provide relatively simple causal explanations for events that are otherwise experienced as complex, uncertain, ambiguous, and potentially troubling or threatening. Allport and Postman, 1946, Kay et al., 2009. It is important, then, to bear in mind that psychological needs to reduce uncertainty and threat are correlated not with ideological extremity in general, but with right-wing conservatism in particular. Jost, 2006, 2017. To conclude, I quote Jost 2021. The main point here is not that conservatives are necessarily more ideological than liberals, although there is evidence from the United States, at least, that they are more ideologically driven than liberals. Grossman and Hopkins, 2016, Hacker and Pearson, 2015. Nor is it likely that conservatives are alone in holding self-deceptive beliefs, but they do score higher than liberals on measures of gullibility, bullshit receptivity, and self-deceptive enhancement. Gligoric et al., 2020, Jost et al., 2010, Fathiker and Schindler, 2016, Sterling et al., 2016, Wojcik et al., 2015. Consistent with these discoveries of a political psychological nature, research in communication finds that conservative media sources and social networks are more likely than those of liberals to include rumor, misinformation, fake news, and conspiratorial thinking, e.g., Benkler et al., 2017, Grinberg et al., 2019, Marwick and Lewis, 2017, J.M. Miller et al., 2016, van der Linden et al., 2021, Vasugi et al., 2018. The broader point is that ideology plays an important role in distorting as well as organizing information.